All right, everybody, back with another live stream here for the reading hour for June 17th, 2025. Just going to take a couple seconds here for the Instagram feed to catch up, and then I'll get started. All right, there we go. All right, so I'll get started here on the Operation Gladio book. So we left off yesterday. The section is Otto's Outburst. The presence of Gladio in Germany came to light in 1952 when Hans Otto, a former SS officer, walked into a police station in Frankfurt and announced that he, quote, belonged to a political resistance group, the task of which was to carry out sabotage activities and blow up bridges in case of a Soviet invasion. He said that although the initiative was made up of former Nazis, new recruits were not expected to espouse neo-fascist beliefs, but only to manifest a deep-seated hatred of communism. So there you go. First and foremost, the priority of all fascists is anti-communism. They will tolerate anti-communists as long as that is the thing you're about. You don't have to specifically be a fascist. They'll lead you into that. And that's also pretty damning about liberals as well. That shows you that fascists and liberals have that one main trait in common. Otto added that the unit, which bore the name Technischer Dienst der Bundesdeutscher Jugend, or TBBDJ, the technical service branch of the League of German Youth, had amassed a blacklist of hundreds of leftists, quote, who were to be assassinated in case of emergency. Cool stuff. Upon questioning, Otto told the Hessen authorities that the TDBDJ received millions in funding from, quote, an American citizen named Sterling Garwood, whom he identified as, quote, an agent of the CIA. Interesting. Very interesting. There certainly couldn't be any history of the CIA funding and arming fascist militias and agents like this. Why would they do such a thing? He further said that the unit had been organized by Nazi General Reinhard Gehlen, who remained sheltered within Vatican City. George August Zinn, the Hessen Prime Minister, became so alarmed by Otto's testimony that he ordered the arrest of 100 members of the TDBDJ and called for a full-scale invasion of the resistance group. Zinn's request was denied by the Bundesgerichtshof, the country's highest court, located in Karlsruhe in southwest Germany. And all members of the secret army were released without comment. Okay, so they're connected very high up, even within the German government, that doesn't want to see anything bad happen to these guys to shut down their operations. Very interesting. Baffled by the High Court's decision, the Prime Minister said, quote, the only legal explanation for these releases can be that the people of the Karlsruhe declared that they acted upon American direction. Yeah, so it's not hard to figure out. It's like, obviously, these people are protected. They're assets of the deep state, unable to be held accountable for any crimes or even intent to premeditatedly commit crimes. Sweden's secret army, the next section here. In 1953, additional information about Gladio surfaced in Sweden with the arrest of Otto Hallberg, a notorious racist and former SS commander, on charges of promoting terrorism. Hallberg openly admitted that he was the leader of a covert army named Sveaborg that had been created by U.S. intelligence officers to ward off any Soviet plans for annexation of Scandinavia. Relaxed and confident, the former Nazi commander rightfully predicted that any investigation into his unit and any police charges raised against him would be squashed by higher authorities, since no Swedish official wanted news to surface concerning the extent to which the Swedish government remained under the direct sway of the CIA and NATO. Hilarious. So imagine just being like an open terrorist, and you can sit there and just smugly smile at the officers when they're interrogating you, knowing that you are protected on high because you actually have dirt on their entire government far above their pay grade for having helped arm and fund your terrorist activities. Quite a position to be in. And this is Sweden. It's like one of those Scandinavian countries that all the liberals like. So this next section here is Gladio's first coup. In 1960, the Gladio operation turned strategic when the Turkish stay-behind unit, known as counter-guerrilla, joined with the military to stage a coup d'etat against the government of Prime Minister Adnan Menderes. Menderes, who was planning a visit to Moscow to secure economic aid, was cast into prison, put on trial by a hastily assembled court, and executed on the island of Imral. After civilian rule was restored by a democratic election, Colonel Alparslan Tirkus, one of the leaders of the uprising, formed the Nationalist Action Party and its paramilitary youth group, the Grey Wolves, with CIA funds. Oh yeah, shout out to Chapo Trap House. They were always talking about the Turkish fascist paramilitary group, the Grey Wolves. That's like even with their patron subscribers are called. The new party espoused a fanatical pan-Turkish ideology that called for reclaiming large sections of the Soviet Union under the flag of a reborn Turkish empire. Okay, so I guess the Turks don't particularly like the Soviets. That would explain a lot about how Turkey is used in such a imperialist fashion against the modern anti-imperialist bloc, which is the closest thing we have to the Soviet Union now. So this next section here, the Pink Pope. But Italy remained under the center of attention for Gladio officials as the PCI reemerged from its years of domination by the Christian Democrats to make monumental gains among the populace. By the early 1960s, the Italian Communist Party boasted a membership of 1,350,000, making it once again the largest communist party in the free world. Most alarming for Gladio, the party began to receive annual support from the Soviet Union that fluctuated in amount from $40 to $50 million. Yet the Vatican, under Pope John the 23rd, the successor to Pius the 12th, failed to condemn this development. Instead, the new pope issued an encyclical Pacem in Terris, some kind of Latin thing, an official letter from the Pope to the bishops titled Peace on Earth, which represented an attempt at rapprochement between Catholicism and communism. In addition, John came to develop a fondness for Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, with whom he held a private audience. Okay, so this is incredibly scary to Gladio, to CIA, to the U.S. deep state, to all the intelligence agencies. They do not want to see a powerful figure that holds that much sway over millions of people around the world, like the Pope, expressing sympathy for communism. They don't even want him to feel sympathetic to communism, let alone express that publicly. So this is not good. In May 1963, John McCone, director of the CIA and a Knight of Malta, received a memorandum from James Spain on the agency's Office of National Estimates on the ramifications of Pope John's policies. There is, quote, no doubt, wrote Spain in a 15-page memo, quote, that vigorous new currents are flowing in virtually every phase of the Church's thinking and activities. This has resulted in a new approach toward Italian politics, which is permissive rather than positive. When Spain visited the Vatican, posing as a visiting scholar on a foreign affairs grant, he voiced his concerns about major gains made by the Italian left, including the PCI, in the 1963 election. Many members of the Curia felt the left's success was attributable to Pope John's conciliatory attitude toward the communists. This was the first election in which the Christian Democrats were not officially endorsed by the Italian Bishops' Conference. John the 23rd insisted upon maintaining a neutral stance in order not to jeopardize his Soviet initiative. Interesting. So yeah, he's actually finally got some interest coming from the other direction. Looks like there's literally some money involved, quite a few millions of it. So I don't know how exactly that's influencing him, but it seems to be the case. Unless this Pope just really believes in the cause. Let's see. So this next section here is learning a lesson. As author Martin A. Lee wrote, Director McCone now took a personal as well as a professional interest in the Vatican situation. Thomas Calamasinus, the station chief in Rome, was instructed to raise the priority of the Vatican spying operation. But the CIA ran into a snag when it learned that some of its best contacts, for example the conservative prelates who held key posts in the extraordinary affairs section of the papal secretariat, were shut out by John the 23rd's tendency to circumvent his own bureaucracy when dealing with the Kremlin. The Pope evidently feared that his diplomatic efforts might be sabotaged by some Machiavellian Monsignor. For this reason, he pursued his goal outside the normal channels of the Curia. A small group of trusted collaborators served as couriers for the Pope, who rarely used the telephone to speak with anyone outside the Vatican for fear that the line might be tapped. When John the 23rd died of stomach cancer on June 3, 1963, the CIA, under McCone, became intent upon influencing the outcome of the conclave so that another, quote, pink pope would not ascend to the throne of St. Peter. The agency's favored candidate was Cardinal Giovanni Battista Montini, the former bishop of Milan, whose father had been the director of Catholic Action, and a member of the Italian Parliament. Okay, so yeah, this is a golden opportunity for the CIA. You see this Pope dying, who was too sympathetic to the Soviet Union for your liking. So what are you going to do? You're of course going to try to influence the next decision of who the Pope is and put in a friendly comprador that will do what you want. Should not be surprising in the least. So this next section here is the rigged papal election. Montini was an ardent supporter of Catholic Gladio. He had served the OSS during World War II in the so-called Vessel Operation and had received millions in black funds from the CIA for his charitable work as the Archbishop of Milan. The relationship between Montini and the U.S. intelligence community was so close that his ascendancy to the See of St. Peter may have been rigged. Time correspondent Roland Flamini uncovered evidence that showed CIA officials were able to confirm the election of Montini in advance of a puff of white smoke emanating from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel, and expressed their pleasure that the conclave had proceeded according to plan. One of Montini's first acts as Pope Paul VI was the appointment of Gelli as Equitum Ordinis Sancti Silvestri Papae, a knight in the Order of Saint Sylvester, one of Catholicism's highest rewards. So Licio Gelli that they're talking about here was like a notorious criminal gangster, heroin trafficker, and I believe he's the one that even said was like an atheist. So it's just especially ironic for him to be getting such a high honor and official title from the Catholic Church. The knighting was extraordinary, since Gelli remained an avowed atheist who had never performed an act in the service of the Holy Mother Church. Nevertheless, the ceremony was of profound significance to Gladio operatives, since it served to confirm the close ties between the Vatican and P2, as well as the Holy See's reliance on Gelli and other CIA agents to maintain its privileged place of power and independence within Italy. Yeah, this is how the deep state and the CIA actually operates, folks. It's like that's why you're always encouraged to go through official channels to make any change in society, because the people in power know that those official channels are all controlled by people who have their same interests, and that you will not be able to do anything within those official channels. So this next section here, the Rat King. The son of a Tuscan miller, Gelli was born in Pistoria on April 21st, 1919. At the age of 17, he enrolled as a volunteer in the 735th Black Shirts Battalion and went to fight in Spain, where his brother Raphael was killed by communist forces at Malaga in April 1938. Upon his return to Italy, he became the key liaison officer to the elite SS division under Field Marshal Hermann Göring. During the Allied occupation in 1943, he escaped incarceration by volunteering to serve with the Counterintelligence Corps of the Fifth Army. In this capacity, he worked in close contact with William Colby, the OSS agent in France, and Alan Dulles, the OSS director, in the establishment of the Office of Reserve Affairs. This shadowy agency, located on Rome's Via Sicilia, was manned by a secret force of the Carabinieri, the Italian National Police, under the command of Federico Umberto D'Amato, a former member of Decima Mas. Its sole purpose was to exercise control, quote, over the most delicate activities of the state. Again, just making it absolutely clear that the people who have the interest and ability and the means to exercise this level of control over even the most minute affairs of the state are quite literally fascist. Like, they have a fascist agenda and they are exercising it, and they have been doing so since before even since before the Cold War ended, let alone since that. I mean, since before World War II, let alone the entirety of the Cold War. Sorry. Through Colby, a devout Roman Catholic, Gelli gained entry to the Vatican, where he united with Friar Krunoslav Draganovic, a Franciscan monk and member of the Ushashi, a Croatian fascist group during World War II, to set up the rat lines by which war criminals, including members of the Nazi High Command, could escape to South America and other havens of refuge. Many of the escapees were issued Vatican passports and traveled to their new hiding places in clerical garb. A memo from an intelligence official working at the U.S. State Department in 1947 explained that, quote, the Vatican justifies its participation by its desire to infiltrate not only European countries, but Latin American countries as well, dealing with people of all political beliefs as long as they are anti-communist and pro-Catholic Church. Oh my God, that's so fantastic. I'm gonna have to save that one for later so I can post it somewhere. Yeah, again, like that's why when people say like left unity is difficult, it's because everyone in the West is aligned against the communists. Like they're all just inherently fascist. And then it's really difficult to form any kind of left unity because the only kind of left unity that would actually work and pose any kind of threat to capitalists, to capital as a whole, is communism. And if everyone in the West who even purports to be leftists and progressives is still coming from a position of anti-communism at their very base, well, then of course you're not going to have any left unity. It's like a recipe for disaster. The next section here, new Nazi havens. The management of the Rat Line required Jelly to make frequent visits to Argentina, the favorite country of Nazi fugitives, where he became a confidant of President Juan Perón. By the early 1950s, the South American country was swarming with Nazi criminals, including Adolf Eichmann, the SS officer responsible for carrying out, quote, the final solution to the Jewish problem. The situation caused U.S. Ambassador Spruill Braden to say, quote, there is no country in the world where the Nazis find themselves in such a strong position as Argentina. That says a lot about Argentina today, too. I think there's a strong through line to the history and right up into modernity there. Thanks in part to Jelly, over 1,600 Nazi scientists and their dependents made their way to the United States to inaugurate the space age. Many of these Nazis ended up working as aircraft designers and engineers at the Glenn L. Martin Company, later the Lockheed Martin Corporation, and Republic Aviation. The efforts of Jelly and Friar Draganovich were supported by the Counterintelligence Corps, the CIC, officials, who realized that many of the Nazi scientists, doctors, intelligence officers, and engineers could be of critical importance in the battle against communism. Once again, just reiterating, that is their first and foremost binding tie. By 1947, the CIC was shelling out $1,400 to Friar Draganovich and Jelly for each war criminal who was sent to their care. So they're getting paid handsomely too. That's a lot of money for that time period. Welcome back, Shibbles. Good to see you again. So Klaus Barbie, oh my god, this guy's like a notorious Nazi. But I'm going to let the book explain it before I say too much. I'll just say, check out the True On episodes about Klaus Barbie because it's wild shit. So Klaus Barbie. One of the most notorious Nazis to come under the care of Jelly and Friar Draganovich was Klaus Barbie. The so-called Butcher of Lyon was responsible for 4,342 murders and 7,591 deportations to death camps during his 2-year posting in the French city. After the war, U.S. intelligence placed him in a safe house in Augsburg, provided him with a sanitized identity, and granted him a generous stipend of $1,700 a month. In 1983, the Justice Department belatedly admitted that U.S. intelligence officials had arranged for Barbie's escape to Bolivia, where he became known as Klaus Altmann and opened a sawmill in La Paz, and that they had lied by denying to French Nazi hunter Serge Klarsfeld that he was under their protection. Throughout his 20-year stay in South America, Barbie proved to be of crucial importance to the CIA by forging close ties to La Mafia Cruzena, a drug cartel formed by Hugo Banzer Suarez, a man trained by the U.S. military at Fort Hunt, and the Escuela de Golpes in Panama, and thereby securing a new source of funding for mounting attacks against leftist regimes. Yeah, that's also part of what they, I think, mentioned in Truanon. It's like how prolific of a career this guy had after being a Nazi for a long time. I also get him confused sometimes with Otto Skorzeny. Like, I can't remember which one of them was also like a notorious pedophile, but it was one of them. Could have been both. So this next section here, the Nazi gold. I'll go on for like one more minute, 19 minutes for this book. So the Nazi gold, the operation of the Rat Line brought Jelly in close contact with the future Pope Paul VI. At the close of the war, Monsignor Montini had been placed in charge of Caritas Italiana, a Vatican charity that provided, quote, protection for German soldiers and Nazi sympathizers. The protection came to include the issuance of refugee travel documents, replete with new identities, to such illustrious figures as Hans Heffelmann, a principal figure in the Third Reich's euthanasia program, and Martin Bormann, Hitler's personal secretary. In addition to the Rat Line, Jelly played a key role in the smuggling of over $80 million in gold and silver bars from the Ustashi treasury in Croatia to the Vatican Bank. Holy Mother Church was very pleased to receive the deposit, quote, for safekeeping, even though Jelly squirreled away 150 gold bars for himself. Yeah, that's how it works. You got to skim a little off the top when you're doing illegal shit. It's not like they're going to report you to the authorities. All right, so I will bookmark it here, and now we can switch over to the Western Marxism book. So we last left off getting up to section six, which is Western Marxism and Messianism. So let's try to formulate an initial summary of the different forms of Marxism, of the different forms that Marxism takes in Europe and in Asia. According to Merleau-Ponty, Marx imagined, quote, a non-capitalistic future that he hoped would be an absolute other. This vision, well represented in Western Marxism, is absent in the East. The underdeveloped countries, before they can completely tear down capitalism, first must and want to enjoy the, quote, miracle of the wonderful development of the productive forces that the Communist Manifesto rightly attributes to that social system. We find Mao in 1940 declaring that the revolution he was promoting, before moving on to socialism, must, quote, clear the way for capitalist development, even if a capitalism strictly controlled by a political power and by a party determined to go well beyond it in carrying out the revolutionary transformation of the existing society. Hell yeah. That's a hell of a sentence right there. That's probably the best way you could sum up like the vision of Mao to Deng up into all the way up into Xi Jinping. It's like that was the idea, and the West simply cannot imagine making kind of any kind of plans that span decades like that, let alone implementing them, because everything is just like by the quarter, by the administration. Like you get a new president in, they just totally undo everything the previous one did. You can never make any kind of long term plans like this. For the Chinese Communist leader, the post capitalist future is not an absolute other to the regime that it is intended to replace. More than a total negation, we find ourselves before a sort of Hegelian Alphabung, a negation that carries with it, even if in a radically new context, the heritage of the high points of that which is negated. It is a question of transcending capitalism, but without compromising. It further strengthens the capacity for developing the productive forces to which it gives impetus. Yeah, I know a lot of people um, have just simplified it by calling the Western Marxists who oppose socialism with Chinese characteristics. They call them purity fetishists. They call them dogmatic, or just. And I think this is probably the most astute observation is that like they equate socialism with poverty, and they're still just like maintaining a conservative, like neocon level worldview. And they think that if you adopt socialism, you have to abandon capitalism um, in every aspect, meaning like you have to just have nothing. Because again, they attribute having things, whether you like producing things, having stuff, commodities, any of it, to capitalism. They say that they literally are taking like a pauper's view, like you have to be Amish or caveman to really do socialism. And I don't know where they get that from, other than like exactly where this book is describing, like their messianic views and like quite literally idealism. The diversity of objective material conditions and cultural traditions drives the bifurcation of Marxism. Judeo Christian messianism has informed the West, reinforced by the horror of the First World War. With the end of the slaughter, there is an expectation of a world redeemed from wrong and sin. One thinks of Bloch, who in August 1918 sees the First World War as a, quote, crusade against radical evil, represented by Germany and by the Central European powers, a crusade whose protagonists should be the Entente, but above all, quote, Christianity in struggle, the Ecclesia Militans. Immediately after the October Revolution, we see him invoke the, quote, transformation of power into love, and transcending the mercantile morality, the original source of evil and sin. It is true, responding to the foreseeable objections, that many times the philosopher makes clear that what he seeks is a concrete utopia, founded on an ontology that does not confuse the existing with the factual, and that does not lose sight of the, quote, not yet existing. Yet this category is so large and so lacking in reference to time and to ways of realizing the longed for future that it could include even the most abstract utopia. I mean, that's certainly good criticism too. It's like so many Western leftists have all these vague and utopian ideas about what they imagine communism should be, should look like, how to even get there, and That's very good for the bourgeois. That's very good for the capitalists who don't want you to make any steps toward actually implementing that kind of future. They love if everyone has utopian ideals, but then also opposes any existing ways of getting there, any existing socialist projects. Super convenient. Schivel says, boom, how Mao was teaching the peasantry Marx before capitalism. Yeah, yeah. A lot to unpack here. A lot of stuff going on here. It's great. So the messianism of Benjamin is quite explicit. So Walter Benjamin, I'm assuming he's still talking about here. In 1940, and on the eve of his suicide, after having criticized in the Theses on the Philosophy of History the quote, homogeneous and empty time, on which an evolutionism incapable of understanding or even imagining the qualitative leap alone can save us is based, he turns to the quote, messianic time of Jewish tradition. Here, quote, every second is the quote, straight gate through which the Messiah might enter. Rather than a cold and rational analysis, the gravest tragedy ever to occur in Europe had brought about a situation so desperate as to suggest waiting for the Messiah as an alternative to the present that appeared to be without any means of escape. Yeah, that's also pretty much it. That's like what every Western Marxist is doing, is just like waiting for a Messiah. Like they don't realize it, but they have turned Marxism into a sort of Western religion where they just have to wait for their individualist hero. Look at the way they treat Luigi Mangione. Like they literally, like, people have profile pictures of him, uh, AI vision, like pictures of him as a saint. It's like you guys are taking entirely the wrong message. You guys are going to worship this guy all the way up until the state executes him, and then you'll have another outburst of protest, and then nothing because you keep waiting for individuals rather than building a real movement. Even an author like Lukács, who in his younger years and in the period in which the horror and the indignation over the war had not yet found an articulated political response, seemed to be influenced by the climate described above. Marianne Weber sees him animated by eschatological hope and looking toward the ultimate goal of world redemption to be brought about thanks to a quote, final conflict between God and Lucifer. Even if this is a tendentious description, one is struck by the fact that in 1916, while the battlefield slaughter was raging, Lukács, taking up an expression of Fichte, speaks of his own time as an era of complete sinfulness. Later, the Hungarian philosopher scolds Fichte for having counterposed the era of complete sinfulness, or having counterposed to the era of complete sinfulness, a contemplated utopian future. It is a criticism that sounds like a self-criticism, and a distancing from the apocalyptic tones of his youth. So I guess this is he's saying that like Lukács is criticizing Fichte, but in a way that makes it clear he's really just criticizing his own previous opinions. It goes without saying that it would be in vain that we should search China, or should search in China, in Indochina, and in Eastern Marxism in general for appeals to ecclesia militans and to the Messiah, or to a vision that entrusts to the revolution the task of the liquidation of radical evil, of complete sinfulness, of the mercantile morality, and of power as such. Yeah, I mean, if you start off with the utopian and idealist goals of trying to eradicate power, trying to eradicate the mercantile morality, trying to eradicate radical evil, complete sinfulness, it's like you might as well be fighting the war on terror, the war on drugs. It's like the goal should be to, in the real world, in a realistic, actual way, knowing what you know about humans and power structures that humans are able to erect and maintain. That's what communism is using that to benefit the most people and remove it from the hands of the bourgeoisie. But if you start with the worst goals, Schill says, ew, was that Trotsky's idea of permanent revolution? Sounds pretty close. Yeah, totally idealist, unrealistic, never going to do anything at all. Sounds about right. Let's see how much here. I'm at 30 minutes, so I got 10 more minutes on this one. Cool. So I have already discussed how different the Chinese cultural tradition was. Certainly, midway through the 19th century in China, the Taiping Revolt broke out, which, breaking with Confucian tradition, sought a radically new order, the quote, celestial reign of peace. Not by chance, however, the protagonist of this gigantic mass rising was convinced that he was the younger brother of Jesus and was profoundly influenced by Christianity and Christian messianism. The tragic outcome of the Taiping Revolt, which cost rivers of blood and ended up accelerating the ruin of the country, and by consequence, its colonial and semi colonial subjection, may have further immunized Chinese culture to messianic temptations, and that could have contributed to a more pragmatic reception of the theory of Marx. In Europe and the West, instead, the great historical crisis, the two world wars, and between the First and Second, the Great Depression, and the rise of Nazism and fascism, found its epicenter and flared up in a particularly traumatic way. Immediately following the Belle Epoque and the Hundred Years' Peace, 1815 to 1914, all this, together with the Judeo Christian tradition, promoted the messianic reading of the tragedy of those decades. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good explanation. Like, if you're going to explain it all in one paragraph, why the East and the West diverged in their interpretations of Marxism, and why the West went idealist and the East went practical, pragmatic, it's like, well, it's pretty evident right there. Like, you can see, it's like they did not have the influence of religion. They saw a previously failed revolt led by one individual who's supposed to be the Messiah, and even had like explicit delusions of Christian grandeur. Um, yeah, that's a recipe for getting people to learn from that lesson. I'm amazed that they were able to do that en masse. So the fact remains of the longue durée of the messianic, and it's like a French term, Longue Duree. I don't know if that means the long duration, but just is fancy. So the fact remains of the longue durée of the messianic and utopian tendency of Western Marxism. It reacted with irritation when Lukács self-critiqued his messianic sectarianism and messianic utopian aspirations of history and class consciousness for the tendency to represent post-capitalism as somehow, quote, proclaiming a total break with every institution and mode of life stemming from the bourgeois world. Yet in the 1960s, the ideal, dear to Herbert Marcuse, of a society founded on substantial liberation from work and on the definitive triumph of eros over every form of domination, and perhaps also of power, was widely diffused and at times radicalized. The principal exponent of Italian, quote, workerism, Mario Tronti, called explicitly for the abolition of work. Decades later, he proudly proclaimed his consonance with the millenarian heresies of the workers of the 20th century. A lot of those are quotes I just like didn't bother quoting because in writing this book he uses a lot of just quotes in the middle of the sentences, like just one or two words will be quotes. But I feel like the message gets across still. So interesting. Like, you have these, again, idealists who are trying to do away with all work. Um, and it's wild. Like, you can almost forgive people for imagining that kind of utopian future now that we have like levels of automation and potentially humanoid robots that people are counting on. Um, but I don't know. I mean, how did you even, was it just like, uh, what do you call it? Like assembly lines that people thought were going to create the post scarcity level of production that you could do away with work entirely? Like, it doesn't even make sense. Schubel says, wow, spotted the oppression there early on. Still more telling is the remarkable success of a book published in 2000. It concludes by evoking an extraordinary future of universal regeneration that recalls not so much the revolution of Marxian memory as the apocatastasis. I've never seen that word before. Uh, Not so much the revolution of Marxian memory as the apocatastasis, of which first century Christians and particularly enthusiastic theologians spoke, signaling the rise of a final reconciliation not only of human beings with one another, but also of humans with nature and the animal species. We think of authors like Origen or John Scotus, the prophets of the apocatastasis. Here, finally, quote, the animals, sister moon, brother sun, the birds of the field, the poor and the exploited humans, together against the will of power and corruption, biopower and communism, cooperation and revolution remain together in love, simplicity, and also innocence. I mean, it sounds very hippie-ish. I just can't imagine like hearing sentiments like that and taking them seriously, let alone thinking that you're actually going to be able to build something like an entirely new world system out of that. Um, it seems like the people in power, like the bourgeois, are very good at finding out some of the core motivations of people who oppose them. A lot of it just being like good feelings, like actual just humane feelings towards their fellow people, and then exploiting that by telling them, like, look, really dig in, lean into the hippie stuff, and all power is bad. It's literally the meme where the capitalists are standing next to the army guy, and they are saying to an anarchist, "Hey, you don't like authority. You don't mind if we use that, right?" That's the whole thing. All right, so now section 7. The struggle against inequality in the West and the East. Condemning with fiery words the carnage of war and the socio-political system that led to it, Bloch attacked the social polarization that characterizes capitalism, notwithstanding the homage it pays to juridical equality. Quote, "This," says Anatole France, is equality before the law. Uh, that it forbids rich and poor alike to steal firewood or to sleep under bridges. That so little hinders actual inequality that it actually protects it. For since the lawyers are trained in no other way than formally, precisely the abilities of the exploiter class in calculation, mistrust, and underhanded accounting find a cognate basis in this formalism. Still apart from the fact that the contents of any possible economic system can be inserted without contradiction into the abstract amoralism of jurisprudence, all of law, far and away the preponderance of criminal law, too, is merely the ruling class's means of maintaining a rule of law protecting its interests. I mean, that's cool. That's great that he's able to like expound on it in that way, but I think a lot more people are more effective when they say like, well, what happens when your boss underpays you? You can't call the police and have them arrest your boss. But if you take $50 out of the register, they will absolutely call the police and have them arrest you. And that's the quickest example you can use to show someone how the law does not work to protect people equally. It protects the rich and the poor alike from things that only the poor would want to do, like stealing, sleeping under bridges, that kind of thing. As we can see, the condemnation was radical, but it was based exclusively on the conditions of the popular masses in the West. This is true as well for Benjamin. He too took up the satirical comments of the French writer on the laws of bourgeois society that, quote, poor and rich are equally forbidden to spend the night under bridges, and that, at the political level, transfer of power is only tolerated, quote, from the privileged to the privileged. He made no reference to the conditions of the people of the colonies. Indeed, as far as Bloch is concerned, we see immediately that in these years he polemicized against those who, in his eyes, excessively emphasized the colonial question. So yeah, they consider those people too radical. They're uncomfortably radical because they actually point at the core contradictions of the system, not whatever would make it a little more comfortable for you living already a privileged life in the imperial core somewhere. I'll do like a couple more minutes on this one. So obviously, Ho Chi Minh too had the cause of equality at heart, but his priorities were different. In the speech that called on French socialists to join the Communist International, he declared, quote, "Such is so-called justice in Indochina. In that country, the Vietnamese are discriminated against. They do not enjoy safety like Europeans or those having European citizenship. Inequality was denounced with an eye primarily toward the conditions of the colonial peoples. For the Vietnamese revolutionary, it was not only a question of challenging the formal character of juridical equality. Such legal equality was not realized in any way in the colonies. Enjoying a decidedly privileged treatment were not only the French, but also those Vietnamese and Indochinese who had Europeanized, such as those who converted to Christianity, the religion of the dominant colonial power, and so, in a way, were co opted into the civilization or into the self styled superior race. For some time, Ho Chi Minh embraced the idea of translating the works of Montesquieu into Vietnamese, in particular, the spirit of the laws. The capitalist West puffs out its chest with pride in its liberal principles, but in the colonies they have always been careful to not put them into practice, but to not even make them known. Hmm. Yeah, that's also one of the core contradictions. Like liberal societies will always claim to have this equality between the races, the colors, like the sexes, genders, whatever. And then when you go to those places, colonies, like the stuff where they're actually drawing all their wealth and benefits from, that is not the case. They don't even have those same kind of belief systems in place, let alone letting the people know how they could fight for them. Ho also denounced material inequality, with a view first of all to the colonies. The Vietnamese, quote, live in misery when there is abundance for their executioners, and die of starvation when there is a bad harvest. Material inequality intersected with legal inequality, so the colonial peoples were forced to submit simultaneously to arbitrary arrests and desperate hunger. Algeria suffers from famine. Here is how Tunisia is ravaged by the same scourge. To remedy this situation, the administration arrested and imprisoned many starving people. And so that the down and out did not take prison for shelter, they were not given anything to eat. Some die of starvation during the imprisonment. Above all, Ho didn't lose sight of perhaps the most important point. The anti-colonial revolution sought to achieve emancipation at every level, not only for the individual but for the nation as well. It was necessary to end the formal nod due to the superior race by the vanquished race. In other words, it was necessary to end the deferential bowing the Vietnamese were obligated to engage in when they ran into a Frenchman. Yeah, and I find that that's also often like the difference between like people who espouse like the Marxist views, like the world systems theory. They have like a coherent ideology that gets to the heart of that basic level of inequality, rather than again just trying to polish the brass on the Titanic, just trying to make the oppression a little more palatable to the people who already live in the privileged imperial core. And of course, the people who live that privileged life do not take kindly to that analysis. It condemns them, it condemns their personal privilege. So they're never going to accept that. Doesn't matter how factual you are. It's like telling a conservative that that they are racist, that like their worldview just is racist. Sorry, I closed my tab here by accident. So, and I also lost my bookmark, unfortunately. So, I know we were on section 7. Okay, so I know we read the Who is at the Wheel section. We read that too, Future of History. Okay, yeah. And these are the things I read through yesterday, talking about how the U.S. is not even trying to set up systems that would be prepared for food instability. They're preparing by hiring more police, building cop cities, and preparing the prisons to accept you when you get when you start causing unrest over the hunger. So the last thing I read yesterday was, additionally, we have fascist accelerationist elements that would exploit our civilizational fragility. This excellent and very in-depth reporting on the far right's fascination with the U.S. electric grid details a coast-to-coast pattern of electrical substation attacks likely inspired by a right-wing plan to push society into collapse. Such a collapse would then allow heavily armed far-right groups to impose their vision for society onto a desperate and vulnerable civilian population. Opportunistic armed groups may further exacerbate a climate-caused crisis and or foul up recovery efforts. So yeah, as I mentioned yesterday, not only are we fighting against the bourgeoisie, like the actual people in power who own and control every system of exercising power, of like enforcing your will upon other people, we're also fighting against people in our own class who just want to cause chaos, who are just wreckers, or actively want things to get worse because they think it's going to lead to their utopia, which does not include people like you. All right, so a positive revolution requires logistics, primarily food, fuel, and weapons, as well as organization and communication. Globalization means we don't have the ability to seize the means of production at a local scale. Social alienation and ubiquitous surveillance means we are unorganized, lack robust communities to fall back on, and can't communicate securely. Revolution is a tough job even when those factors are met. It is impossible without them. The coming violence will be reactionary, not revolutionary. In the West, yeah, you have to pretty much follow up all of those things with in the West. There are countries that are still run by communist parties that are still building socialism, and it is not the West. Americans are far more vulnerable than we'd like to convince ourselves. Our society is hyper-fragile, meaning that any breakage in one of the many underlying systems can lead to a complete collapse of an entire system. We depend heavily on imports, as detailed in sections 6.2 and 6.3, again referencing the pairs that go around the world like twice just before they're sold. We depend on crews of workers constantly maintaining our electric grid and telecommunications infrastructure. We produce practically nothing needed for subsistence at the local level. We have zero resiliency. hmm There's a picture here, it's just a meme. It says, Grandma survived the Great Depression because her supply chain was local and she knew how to do stuff. And I'm not just a big fan of the individualization and this whole like victim blaming, because it is that. If you blame all the working classes of the world for like not having the ability to individually replace every aspect of society that is getting systematically removed by the bourgeoisie, that's not only stupid, but it's also a recipe for failure. Like, it's not helping. Um, and that's what the anarchists are all doing. Like, the people who are trying to just go to this kind of solution, this woman standing in front of her garden, that's cool, but not everybody can do that. And it's certainly not a mass scale solution. Socialism would be state run abundance, not like the way the Democrats want to do it, but actual abundance run by a state that works in the interest of the working class. That is a solution. One thing you can always count on billionaires for is hubris. They are actually stupid enough to think they can re-terraform Earth after removing several billion, quote, useless eaters. Billionaires likely believe they can survive in their bunkers, and while it is true that they will likely be the last to die, they or their children will not survive the end of the century either. This may be the hardest part for many people to grasp. Billionaires do not have a long game. The only way they know how to act is all or nothing. The wealthy despise workers as vermin. They would rather die than share the world's natural wealth, and they may soon grant their own wish to be dining and drinking champagne on the deck of the Titanic as it slips beneath the waves. And I still believe, like, especially after reading this, but I kind of have believed this since it came out years ago, and since I've been reading all the other things I've read about the climate, um, and how the government works. I still think the rich have known this for a long time, and all of the stuff that goes along with government, with politics, with world affairs, is quite literally a facade. They're playing these power games. They're concerned about things like Greenland and these shipping lanes and all the resources because they know that this is the future, and they're just trying to feather their nests as best as they can for the remainder. The critical events we have to look forward to in the near future are increasingly erratic catastrophic weather, multi-breadbasket crop failure, global famine, supply chain failures, government violence, right-wing civilian violence, loss of power grids and telecommunications, refugee wars, civilizational collapse, followed by a massive die-off as the aerosol shield disappears and populations revert in a completely unmanaged way to local subsistence without complex supply chains. This last step is where industrialized first world nations will fare far worse than they currently expect. Yeah, a lot of these paragraphs, when I read them, I just think of how I can't wait to screenshot them and post them somewhere, like on Instagram, where they'll get like barely any attention anyway. But still, this stuff is fire. Exactly what follows after that is extremely hard to predict and will depend largely on whether nuclear weapons are detonated during that collapse. By assuming no nuclear war, by no means a safe assumption, I would expect that by 2050, when global average temperature is at least 2 degrees Celsius, that no organized governments will remain. No global logistics or fossil fuel transport or refining. No large-scale fossil fuel dependent agriculture. No dense cities. All nuclear power stations abandoned and leaking. Global population will be clustered in whatever geographical regions turn out to suffer the least inhospitable weather. Very hard to predict where those will be. Yeah, that's like the $1 million question too. Like everyone and their brothers trying to figure out, well, where are the safe zones? Where are the naturally occurring climate green zones going to be? And nobody fucking knows. No one can predict any of that shit. That's why people build bunkers. I have previously quoted Will Steffens saying 4 degrees Celsius is not survivable by humans, section 5.1. Here are a few more comments on extinction from scientists. This article by Bill Rees is titled, quote, Yes, the climate crisis may wipe out 6 billion people. Quote, a climate symposium organized to discuss the implications of a 4 degrees Celsius warmer, of 4 degrees Celsius warmer, of a 4 degrees Celsius warmer world, concluded, quote, less than a billion people will survive. Here, Schellnhuber is quoted as saying, quote, at 4 degrees Celsius, Earth's carrying capacity estimates are below 1 billion people. His words were echoed by Professor Kevin Anderson on the UK's Tyndall Centre for Climate Change. Only about 10% of the planet's population would survive at 4 degrees Celsius. Similarly, in May of this year, Johan Rockström, current director of the Potsdam Institute, opined that in a 4 degrees Celsius warmer world, quote, it's difficult to see how we could accommodate a billion people or even half of that. So yeah. Borrowing a couple quotes from this thread by Roger Hallam, Peter Kalmus says, quote, I am working on projections of extreme humid heat, and hopefully will soon be communicating the results publicly and refining them over time. They are harrowing. All of this activism must be seen in the context of potential for future death and suffering. When billions of lives are at stake, including the lives of people we love or even our own lives, then yes, risking arrest to try to stop that through nonviolent civil disobedience is probably, quote, worth it for a lot of us. This is a quote from James Dyke. Most people are oblivious to the fact that we have already produced irreversible climate change. The Holocene is over. What we do next determines what sort of future we have, if we have any sort of future on planet Earth. I also think this is certainly why people like Elon Musk are so intent to get out into space to colonize other planets, because they don't see it as a possibility to rehabilitate this one. But it's just also so unrealistic. It's like it's the same thing. You're literally just taking the problem and moving it to an entire different planet. You can't terraform this planet because you can't even seem to, on a mass scale, do anything about the climate to prevent it from turning into an inhospitable nightmare. So what makes you think you can do that somewhere else where you're not even there? You don't have any kind of productive capacity or machines there yet. Like, what are they basing this on? It's almost like it's all cope. Okay, so it's notable to look at how some of those estimates are worded. We're not talking about a best guess 1 billion with error margins plus or minus. We're talking about a billion on the high end, with the unspoken low end of the estimate range being 0. And these estimates come from people with full faith in their governments to enact and build meaningful climate resiliency plans before then, in some cases currently employed by the US government, such as Kalmus, speaking on the record where they can be quoted on the internet by people like me. At every step, we've consciously made the worst possible decisions, allowing a small number of psychopaths to lead and decide for the complacent masses. The idea that we'll somehow pull our act together at the last minute and hit the high end is not serious. All this is just the first step along the road to an eventual 10 degrees Celsius Earth already baked into present CO2 levels. So now we're getting to section 8, the conclusion. So I guess I'm actually most of the way through this book. Oh yeah, I'm on page 113 or 112 of 123. So I'll have to take another book either after today or tomorrow. Once I'm done with this one, I'll have to substitute a third book. So section 8, the conclusion, 8.1, it's simpler than you think. If there is one key takeaway from all this, is that climate change is far simpler than we've been led to believe. You can throw out all the talk of net zero, carbon dioxide removal, scenarios and pathways, carbon budgets, and whatever other buzzwords IPCC will introduce next. The physical climate facts are, we've put over 1 trillion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere that we cannot remove. Along with other GHGs, it will warm the globe by at least 4 degrees Celsius by 2100, even if all emissions stop today. Agricultural failure is imminent within a decade or so. The socio-political facts are, hyper-fragile modern civilization will collapse following the agricultural failure. We're not going to geoengineer our way out of this. There will not be a revolution. Fascism is ascendant, and governments will protect billionaires and sacrifice the working class. Once again, I'm going to caveat that with, in the West. There's nothing we can do except try to soften the blow on the children and the most vulnerable. After 1500 years or so, the Earth will have warmed 10 degrees Celsius, which will be practically a sterilizing event for the planet. Earth will be doing good to still have anything larger than bacteria alive. If complex life ever evolves on this planet again, the only sign humans existed will be a geological layer of plastic microparticles. So section 8.2. Why don't scientists agree? There are several reasons why most scientists are happily trotting along with net zero. Some are simply lying. Climate scientist James Dyke posted recently, quote, last year I asked someone who, let's say, has quite a bit of experience in climate politics if they thought we were going to pass 1.5. They said, of course, but we can't say that yet. I asked them, well, what should we say about 1.5? There was a long pause. Climate scientist and author Bill McGuire wrote an open letter to all climate scientists saying, quote, I have talked to many of you in private, and the response without exception has been that the true situation is far worse than you are prepared to admit in public. Others, to put it bluntly, are idiots. The majority of what we call scientists today should more properly be called technicians or specialists. Increasing the complexity means that it takes an entire career of study to reach the cutting edge and be able to advance the discipline. If it took 15 years to learn to be a truck driver, we wouldn't call truck drivers scientists. These are not well rounded thinkers, a far cry from what used to be called, quote, natural philosophy. They are as narrow focused and siloed as it is possible for a human to be. They have zero understanding of the world they live in, or its politics, or how fragile their life support systems are, or where their food comes from. Most have zero knowledge or understanding of ecology. James Hansen is an Andrew Yang supporter, for God's sake. He seriously wants to put a millionaire con artist in charge of solving climate change. This is not something that a competent adult can think. Bill Rees can barely make it through a single paragraph without broadcasting his extreme fixation on overpopulation. I trust climate scientists to crunch numbers and nothing more. A kinder way to say this would be that it is extremely difficult to do both production and analysis at the same time. It is difficult, all-consuming work to develop, compile, coordinate, and present specialized new findings. It is a tall order to expect a person engaged in that effort to also conduct a thorough analysis of disciplines outside their own. And this is a great point too. This also goes into the manufacturing consent thing. It's like not even necessarily that these people only get to positions of power because they align with the agenda of the powerful people. That's certainly the case, but also like you need such a level of specialization that um, even if you wanted to speak out on some kind of grander narrative or like macro level events, like you would look silly doing it. You would probably embarrass yourself because you would be so siloed in your own little pigeonhole thing that you wouldn't be able to do so in an informed way. You would just sound bad. This comment by Professor Ray Wills is illustrative. Quote, science is naturally conservative, and so if projections from models are wrong, science is most often wrong by understatement. I can hardly express how galactically wrong this is. In science, in science and engineering, conservative means a low tolerance for risk. For example, if you ask an engineer how to design a bridge for you that can support trucks weighing up to 40 tons, a conservative engineer will design a bridge with a factor of safety to ensure it can actually support trucks of up to 50 or 60 tons. The greater the factor of safety, the more, quote, conservative the design. If climate scientists are underestimating climate impacts, that is the opposite of a conservative approach. This illuminates which threats climate scientists consider most important and worth hedging their bets against. Rather than taking a conservative approach to human safety, up to and including the threat of human extinction, climate scientists chose to hedge against getting yelled at or laughed at for being alarmist. That is the primary threat that they felt the need to take a conservative approach to defend against. The thought of getting egg on their face was more frightening than the prospect of human extinction. Another reason is that we're asking the wrong people. I do not ask a doctor what type of oil to run in my car's engine. I do not ask an engineer what multivitamin I should take, and I do not ask a climate scientist how living systems are going to respond to calculated warming, or how scientists will respond when people are starving to death by the hundreds of millions, or how societies will respond. They don't know. It's outside their realm of expertise, but of course they're happy to pontificate. Climate science is possibly the most complicated application of 3D fluid physics out there. Of application of advanced 3D fluid physics. Every climate scientist is also a skilled mathematician and likely a programmer. However, after producing their numbers, they have nothing more to add to the conversation than any layman. It doesn't help the matter that agricultural sciences are full of conservative climate deniers. Those are folks who should be really sounding the alarm right now, but I have zero hope that any Texas A&M grads are going to lead the charge in challenging the Davos narrative on climate change or encouraging plant-based diets. Which longer does this go on? Okay, yeah, I got some time here. A final lens to understand the failure of climate scientists to recognize the reality of our situation. Okay, so yeah, it's literally just Noam Chomsky explaining the thing I was just talking about. I feel like I already read this conclusion at some point. I don't know if he like puts it somewhere else in the book and I just don't remember reading it. I don't know. I'll read this again. A final lens to understand the failure of climate scientists to recognize the reality of our situation is explained by Noam Chomsky, who has repeated emphatically for decades that analyzing global geopolitics is staggeringly simple. Quote, An ordinary 15-year-old can do it from understanding power. As a linguist, his education and research or career expertise have no relation to his writings on geopolitics. When asked what qualifications he has to support his assertions, he responds, paraphrasing, I have none, and I need none. So I'm just going to read the highlighted section of this paragraph. He quotes in a picture here. Noam Chomsky says, I mean, if somebody were to ask me to give a talk on quantum physics, I'd refuse, because I don't understand it enough. But world affairs are trivial. There's nothing in the social sciences or history or whatever that is beyond the intellectual capacities of an ordinary 15-year-old. You have to do a little work, you have to do some reading, you have to be able to think, but there's nothing deep. If there are any theories around that require some special kind of training to understand, then they've been kept a carefully guarded secret. Echoing some of the points made by Kevin Anderson in section 4.4, Chomsky writes, quote, typically the elites are the most indoctrinated segment of a society, because they are the ones who are exposed to the most propaganda and actually take part in the decision-making process. In the highlighted section here, in fact, it says the same thing. So it's that. He describes a selection process that begins in kindergarten. These comments are aimed at journalists, but apply equally well to climate scientists. So the highlighted section here, he's describing the very complicated filtering system, which actually starts in kindergarten. In fact, the whole educational system and professional training system is a very elaborate filter, which just weeds out people who are too independent and who think for themselves and don't know how to be submissive and so on, because they're dysfunctional to the institutions. And the author returns, I beg you all to please go to your local library, ask for a copy of Understanding Power, sit down in a comfy chair, and read Chapter 4. In 30 minutes, you will have attained a level of understanding held by less than 1% of the American population, and you will know exactly why climate scientists are not screaming about near-term extinction. The ultimate effect on the public of all this is that no one knows what to think. The IPCC says everything's fine, that magical technology will fix everything. Fox News says it's all fake, made up by scientists for some reason that Fox can never explain. Hannah Arendt summarized the effect perfectly in a 1974 interview. The moment we no longer have a free press, anything can happen. What makes it possible for a totalitarian or any other dictatorship to rule is that the people are not informed. How can you have an opinion if you are not informed? If everybody always lies to you, the consequence is that you have to believe is not that you have to believe the lies, but rather that nobody believes anything any longer. This is because lies, by their very nature, have to be changed, and a lying government has constantly to rewrite its own history. On the receiving end, you get not only one lie, a lie which could go on for the rest of your days, but you get a great number of lies depending on how the political wind blows. And a people that no longer can believe anything cannot make up its mind. It is deprived not only of its capacity to act, but also of its capacity to think and to judge. And with such a people, you can then do what you please. This is the position we find ourselves in today. It is true of climate change, it is true of COVID, it is true of every significant issue in the modern world. We are lied to so consistently and so pervasively that most of the public gives up on the very idea of knowing the truth about anything. Our cultural overemphasis on credentialism undermines interdisciplinary analysis and critical thinkers that challenge the status quo. And they have a picture of the two characters in The Notebook talking to each other, and they're standing in the rain, and it's labeled credentialism. And the woman says, "Is it raining?" And Ryan Gosling says, "I don't know. I'm not a meteorologist." Hilarious. I can never remember if that's Amy Adams or Rachel McAdams. I always get them confused. I think I'm at an hour for the day. Yeah, I'm at an hour 3. So I'll stop it here. I'll actually bookmark it on the last setting. It's section 8.3 notes. So I'm on, let's see. I'm on page 122 of 123. Oh my God. I guess I'll just finish it up. Sorry, you guys. All right. 8.3 notes. I owe an enormous debt to Mark Cranfield, who tirelessly communicates the urgent facts of our situation on his Twitter account, painstakingly linking source documents so anyone can evaluate and draw conclusions. Mark is a career risk assessor and brings a desperately needed independent perspective to the matter. I have linked extensively to various updates by James Hansen, but wanted to also include a link to his main webpage. The updates are only available as PDFs, or if you sign up to his email list, which I recommend you do, you can get emailed links to HTML versions of future updates. Hansen is in his 80s, which means he's not chasing academic clout and approval as many of the career scientists contributing to the IPCC reports likely are, which grants him an important degree of editorial freedom. I produced this article primarily to share with family and friends, Anyone finding this on the internet may be asking who I am. What are my credentials? I've provided sufficiently extensive source links that you don't need to take my word on anything. Read the sources and make your own conclusions. I have disabled comments on the post so that it stays clean and doesn't become a troll mess, and because the information presented should speak for itself. I'm not interested in debating or arguing any of this. However, if you have questions, you can reach me by email at samhall20@proton.me. I've made several edits after publication to clarify or correct certain sections. I'm not attempting to bring the whole article up to date or to include the incredible global climate developments that have occurred since the initial publication. Quote, fortune is of sluggish growth, but ruin is rapid. Quote from Seneca. And then it's people on the high end of the Titanic. It's a graphic here. As it's about to sink in the water, saying, I guess this is the new normal. Yeah. Okay, so I'm finished with that book, and I guess I'll have to take suggestions from the crowd if anybody has one that they would like me to replace it with starting tomorrow. So, taking suggestions there. I'll ask in the Discord as well and see what people like. But once again, thank you for joining, and I will